Forget the slow, lumbering tanks. If you wanted to survive the chaos of World War II, you need speed. These are the high-speed predators that hunted in the shadows of the front lines. From German 8-wheeled monsters to Russian mini-tanks, we are explaining every significant armored car of the Second World War. Let's roll. Germany. The kings of over-engineering. Sd.Kfz 221. We start with the Leichter Panzerspauwagen, the 221. This tiny four-wheel scout was Germany's eyes during the early Blitzkrieg. It was nimble and fast, but with only a single machine gun and paper-thin armor, it was essentially a bulletproof motorcycle with four wheels. It proved that speed was a weapon, but it definitely wasn't built for a fair fight. Sd.Kfz 222. The 222 is the most iconic version of the Light Scout series. Mil added a 20mm autocannon in an open-top turret, giving it enough punch to shred enemy scout cars and light aircraft. It was the gold standard for reconnaissance until the Russian mud proved that four wheels weren't always enough to keep a scout moving. Sd.Kfz 231 6-Rad. Before the famous 8-wheelers, there was the 6-Rad. Based on a modified truck chassis, this heavy armored car looked imposing but struggled off-road. It was a bridge between the old-school truck designs of the 1920s and the high-tech monsters Germany would eventually build. Most were relegated to internal security once the real fighting started. Sd.Kfz 231 232 8-Rad. This is the heavy hitter. The 8-Rad featured all-wheel steering and all-wheel drive, making it surprisingly agile for its massive size. The 232 version is famous for its giant bed frame radio antenna, allowing it to transmit recon data across vast distances. It was the ultimate long-range predator of the North African desert. Sd.Kfz 234-1. The 234 series was the pinnacle of German armored car design. The 234-1 used a 20mm autocannon in a multi-purpose turret. It featured a powerful tetradiesel engine that was air-cooled, meaning it didn't freeze in Russia or overheat in Africa. It was fast, quiet, and deadly, the perfect stealth scout for a crumbling empire. Sd.Kfz 234-2 Puma. The Puma is arguably the greatest armored car of the entire war. Mil took the 234 chassis and bolted on a 50mm tank gun, the same one used on the Panzer III. It could outrun almost anything it couldn't outgun. It was a sleek, 8-wheeled assassin that could knock out an Allied tank and disappear before the dust settled. Sd.Kfz 234-3 Stummel. When the scouts needed heavy fire support, they called for the Stummel. This version traded the Puma's long gun for a short-barreled 75mm howitzer. It was designed to blast anti-tank gun nests and infantry positions, providing a pocket artillery punch to the fast-moving reconnaissance units during the retreat back to Germany. Sd.Kfz 234-4 Packwagon. In a move of total desperation, Germany mounted a massive 75mm Pak-40 anti-tank gun onto the Puma chassis. It had no turret and almost no protection for the crew, but it was a terrifying shoot-and-scoot weapon. It could kill the heaviest Allied tanks, and then hit 50 miles per hour in reverse to escape. ADGZ. Originally an Austrian design, the ADGZ was a massive, 8-wheeled beast with a strange, symmetrical body. It had two driving positions, meaning it could drive at full speed in either direction without turning around. It was used primarily by the SS for rear area security, looking more like a futuristic police van than a frontline combat vehicle. USA. The kings of speed and mass production. M8 Greyhound. The M8 Greyhound was the standard-issue 6-wheel scout for the U.S. Army. It was incredibly fast on paved roads, clocking in at over 55 miles per hour. While its 37mm gun was weak against tanks, it was a terror against infantry. Fun fact, one Greyhound actually managed to kill a Tiger tank by sneaking up behind it and firing at its engine. M20 utility car. The M20 was the Greyhound's little brother. It removed the turret to create an open-top transport for command staff and cargo. It was used as a high-speed armored taxi and a mobile radio hub. Without the heavy turret, it was even faster than the M8, making it the favorite ride for generals who wanted to see the front lines up close. T-17E1 Staghound. The Staghound is a weird one. It was designed by Chevrolet for the U.S. Army, but they didn't want it. The British, however, loved it. It was a massive 4x4 with dual engines and heavy armor for a scout car. It was so tough that British crews often used it like a light tank, leading the charge instead of just scouting. T-17 Deerhound. The Deerhound was the six-wheel version of the Staghound. Only about 250 were built before the US decided the six-wheel layout was redundant compared to the M8 Greyhound. It was an interesting what-if of American design, heavy, stable, and well-armed, but ultimately a victim of the American military's desire for standardized logistics. T-18 Boarhound. This thing was a monster. The T-18 Boarhound was a massive 8x8 armored car that weighed nearly 30 tons, more than many medium tanks. It was built for the British, who wanted a heavy armored car for the desert. Only 30 were produced because it was simply too big and heavy for most bridges and muddy European roads. M3 White Scout Car. The M3 White was the transition between a truck and a tank. It was a four-wheel armored vehicle with an open top and a skate rail for mounting machine guns. While it wasn't a true scout car but served as a blueprint. Great Britain and Commonwealth, Desert Scouts. Daimler Dingo. The Dingo is the ultimate pocket scout car. This tiny 4x4 featured a pre-selector gearbox and a unique slide-back roof. It was so small it could hide behind a hedge and so fast in reverse that it could escape almost any ambush. It was beloved by crews for its reliability and its ability to squeeze into places no tank could follow. Daimler Armored Car. The big brother to the Dingo, the Daimler Armored Car featured a turret with a 2-pounder anti-tank gun. It used a unique transfer box that allowed it to drive in reverse through all 5 gears. This meant if a Daimler ran into a Tiger tank, it could back away at 40 miles per hour without ever turning its back. Humber Scout Car. The Humber Scout Car was Britain's Plan B. When Daimler couldn't keep up with production, Humber stepped in with this slightly larger, simplified Scout. It wasn't as sophisticated as the Dingo, but it was rugged and dependable. It served as a mobile office for officers and a reliable link between the front line and the command tents. Humber Armored Car. This was the workhorse of the British armored car regiments. The Humber featured a high-clearance 4x4 chassis that made it a legend in the North African desert. It went through 4 different marks, eventually gaining a 37mm gun. It wasn't the fastest or the best armed, but it was the gun that was always there when the British needed eyes on the enemy. Guy Armored Car. The Guy Armored Car is historically significant because it was the first British armored vehicle to use an all-welded hull instead of rivets. This made it much stronger and safer for the crew. Only 100 were built before production shifted to the Humber, but the Guy set the standard for how all future British armor would be constructed. AEC Armored Car Matador. The AEC Matador was the heavyweight of the British fleet. Built on a massive truck chassis, it carried a 6-pounder or even a 75mm tank gun. Coventry Armored Car. The Coventry was a late-war attempt to create a universal armored car that combined the best features of the Daimler and the AEC. However, by the time it was ready, the war was nearly over, and the Allied armies were already swimming in M8 Greyhounds. Only a few hundred were made, serving mostly in the post-war colonies. Marmon Harrington, South Africa. The South African-built Marmon Harrington was the desert taxi of the Commonwealth. Built using American truck parts and British guns, it was the definition of MacGyver engineering. It was used for everything from scouting to anti-aircraft defense, proving that you didn't need a fancy factory to build a world-class combat vehicle. Otter Light Reconnaissance Car Canada. The Otter was Canada's contribution to the scout car world. Built on a heavy-duty Chevy truck chassis, it featured a small light machine gun turret. It was used primarily by Canadian and British units in Italy and Northern Europe. It wasn't fancy, but it was a solid, reliable workhorse that did the dirty work of patrolling rear area roads. Rhino Heavy Armored Car, Australia. The Rhino was an experimental Australian beast. With the threat of Japanese invasion looming, Australia built this massive, heavily armored car with a 30mm thick hull. It was designed to be a mobile fortress, but it proved to be too heavy and slow for the Pacific theater. Only one prototype remains, a testament to Aussie do-it-yourself grit. Soviet Union, the kings of heavy firepower. BA-3. The BA-3 was the early heavy car of the Soviet Union. It featured a massive 45mm tank turret, the same one found on the T-26 tank. While it had incredible firepower for a car, its truck-based chassis was top-heavy and struggled in the Russian mud. It was a glass cannon that could kill a tank but could be stopped by a large rock. BA-6. The BA-6 was a refined version of the BA-3, featuring better tires and a more reliable engine. It was used extensively in the Spanish Civil War and against the Japanese in Mongolia. It proved that a six-wheeled armored car with a tank gun was a terrifying weapon on open plains, even if it was a nightmare to drive in the rain. Auto Blinda AB-40. The AB-40 was Italy's first modern armored car. It featured four-wheel steering and dual driving positions, allowing it to reverse out of trouble instantly. However, it was only armed with machine guns, making it purely a scout. It set the mechanical foundation for the much more famous and deadly versions that would follow in the desert. Lynx. The Lynx was an Italian copy of the British Daimler Dingo. Italy realized they needed a small, fast scout car for tight mountain roads, so they simply borrowed the British design. It was a fantastic little 4x4 that served both the Italian forces and the Germans, proving that a good design is a good design, no matter who invented it.